Welcome back to American Zarathustra. I'm extremely pleased to have on the show with me an old friend and a new voice to many of us in the white identitarian art culture, Pilleater. Pilleater, how are you today, sir?
It's nice to talk to you, Donald, and nice to talk to you, Nolis. It is good to hear from you guys again. Very excited to be on this platform.
It's going to be a really interesting show. I really want people to learn more about you. And then also, welcome back, my good friend and co-host, Nullis, host of Conversations with the Wind on White Art Collective. How are you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing really well. Thank you very much, Donald. Hello, Pilleater, and hello to the audience.
Fantastic. So it's always a challenge to introduce you, Pilleater, because you're so prolific in your writing. You've been vlogging and blogging. You create music. You create video. You're an artist in your own right, and I can't. It's even hard to describe you. I think people who are very deep into pop culture would deeply appreciate you and your work. There's all kinds of different references. You've published several books. You were recently on American Zarathustra to do a review of the recent American Renaissance Conference, which was quite a wonderful show. And I recommend people who watch this show to look up the American Renaissance Amaran review with Pilleater. But first off, you have just arrived in Korea. Tell us about your life in Korea. What's going on?
I am in Busan right now, and I'm with the family, and I just got in. Well, I passed the infamous 10-day quarantine in Gimpo, so then I had to take a domestic flight to Busan. But today I just had to get a mandatory COVID check because the laws are so strict here with COVID that you have to have either be vaxxed or send some kind of 72-hour, I'm not, I don't have COVID to enter anything, let alone just go indoors. And it's very harsh here. I'm not vaccinated. They have a different privilege for foreigners. Foreigners, they can only be in the country for like 60 days and they have to get out. But,
Wow.
but in my perspective, it seems like if you are a Korean and Korean citizen here, it's very harsh on many conditions. And it is interesting, but the big thing I got away from this is that they are orderly about everything. They're very organized, way more than the States is. But I would say, if anything, that the pandemic thing is kind of blown up to a degree that they'll tell you in the States, COVID's rampant everywhere, when really at the end of the day, I just see it as this kind of state controlled formality that of kind of this to the point of getting rid of it and then somehow, moving along with everything. But I would say the COVID laws are overblown, but if you follow protocol, it seems to be just a nuisance and just the state intervening constantly.
Right.
Especially, but I'm not Korean, but it just shows you with Korean people, it's a lot you have to suffer through. And as a foreigner, you kind of have expectations to the said law. But anyway, Korea is so nice. I'm here by the bay. Had oysters yesterday, and probably going to go to Seoul this week. Okay. And we're just going to have fun for a bit. So yeah, I'm just going to spend till January, February, and just but it's a nice place. You just have to play the game for a bit. And sure. I can vouch as an unvaccinated person. So
okay, very good. I actually did a layover in Korea for a little while, but that's my Korea story anyway. So let's try to introduce your work. I'm going to share your website in just a moment for the audience to look at and run over the different publishing projects and the music and the wonderful array of stuff you've done. You seem quite prolific to me. I'm really, to be honest, impressed. How long have you been producing content that is right wing?
I think the date I say is April 5th, 2009, because the name Pilleater was established on ytmnd.com, which was kind of an early, before there was memes, people called it like internet fads or jokes or audio visuals that come from like the demo scene, but you probably can see a link, ytmnd.com. I'm actually still a little bit active on that site, but in the early days of internet subcultures and whatnot, that was the only place for memes. And right there, April 5th, 2009, I just did a Pondering My Orb website because nobody had the domain. That requires its own digression there, but before we got into this, you told me, Pilleater, your link tree is broken. They banned you. And I checked it. And I was like, what the?
Yeah,
I just updated the website right before we got on, but my second link tree to my music is up. It's okay to sell your music, but it's not okay to link your books.
No.
So for now, it's okay to go to pilleater.com and see my books under the book tab there. So I'm gonna have to do some cleaning up. So books.com music link tree. But that goes to show you that you can't just go on the Pilleater link tree anymore. It's going to be on my music link tree now. But for now, it'll just be on my website. And there's now 8 books I have. So, and more of that can be on my YouTube. I made a video on it. So, Pilleater link tree does not work, but CCR music link tree, that works for my music. So,
okay.
Just as a side note, Donald and Pilleater, it happened to me as well today with Linktree, and Hyrith posted a new her links on a new site called bio.link, and I did the same thing, and it seems to work. So just as a advice for anyone listening, and also to the both of you.
You're gonna have to link that to me later. I'm gonna have to be getting on this week.
I'll send it I'll send it to you in the chat.
Awesome sauce. So wow, I mean, there's a bit of a danger here of getting lost down all these different avenues. I do want to give a fairly good overview of the stuff that you've done. I played a little bit of your music on the last show you were on. How would you describe your music generally?
Well, originally, I mean, I started when I was 15. I was playing sitar because my parents wanted me to get into Berklee School of Music in Boston, but that never really worked out because my older brother was the musician. I was just following the lead. And music was kind of just fun. I really wanted to make friends as a teenager and just to be an English major. But, having a family that's music oriented, you kind of just get into it. And just like most geeky people, I like electronic music. I have synthesizers and drum machines and do computer music. I've done a vaporwave tape. I've done I compiled my old music, all that. I'm always experimenting with those different mediums. You really don't see, I mean, as much as electronic music is proliferated and anybody can get into it, you're seeing less and less of the types who are into the classical, synth pop style, Depeche Mode or whatever, or just whatever. Everybody wants to make noise, but nobody really wants to compose really good electronic music. And, it's a hobby for me. And I definitely see it something to express with the print medium as well. I mean, on my BitChute, you're just looking at it's hard because when I started BitChute, BitChute's not the same as YouTube. You kind of have to manually upload videos on BitChute. Now that we have Odyssey is just a miracle just to get everything on there. But you might find some interesting stuff on BitChute that's exclusive too.
Right.
Yeah, BitChute's another clandestine platform. You just have to upload it and write something, but it's usually on Odyssey. People are finding this, but it's always good to have mirrors, right?
Yeah. So, do you make your own videos as well for your music videos, or for your music?
Well, for the longest time, I used a trial version of Final Cut Pro, but because I'm so lazy, I just use iMovie on my MacBook Air. It's nothing that hidden magician secrets exposed, but my ideal is eventually if I do buy a new $3,000 MacBook, I'll probably do Final Cut Pro or whatever, and maybe I'll up my video game. I always tell myself that, but if you could just record yourself and write a Substack article and people are exposed to it, that does more than just a flashy video about something. But there's always a part of me saying, maybe I should do some like video animations and actually do artsy stuff. But I'm always into the whole, what can I do in the minimal medium of just pictures or whatever, just recording my stuff and lost files, and just doing stuff like that. And so on all those platforms, it's just me experimenting with the stuff and what's on my mind all the time. And I really don't care what my friends think at the time. It's just like, I want to say it, I want to say what I think about this or what I think. I'm never really on the same page because, again, the whole thing is you could be right wing in philosophy or like nouveau droit, the French philosophy, and be anti-liberal, anti-modern, but you could still have like, what's your opinion on this or that? And that's something that sounds so contrarian, but yet it makes sense. The point in being is it humanizes people. It's not like, the left and the liberal sphere says, oh, we can talk about anything from women's rights to what we think about blacks. But it's like, well, someone who's right can do the same thing. They just have a different philosophy base. And I think that's always something that the right circles are always stuck in. They always feel like they have to talk about this, or they have to talk about Heideggerian green politics or something. But it's like, you could talk about many things. It's because you all belong in this dark enlightenment, anti-liberal sphere, for sure.
So what about your music and your writing and your content is right-wing, and specifically what about it is white identitarian?
Well, first, I am a white boy. I am French, Irish, Hungarian, Polish mix there. I am an admixture. European person. So I don't think my identity, but it just shows you that that's my authentic being, right? And in the condition of growing up in the Delaware Valley of Pennsylvania in the late 20th, 21st century, you have a say in the thing. I'm not just a deracinated human being like what other whites see themselves as uptight liberals. And so you're always thinking, how do you feel about politics? How do you feel about art? What is something about your culture you do that's different from what other people do? And so, getting into nationalist and right-wing circles, it was just more on par with something that was so obvious that you're talking, whether it's, the difference, race realism, or difference between men and women, the concept of a paternal state that isn't there, that you're almost against individualism, the consumer state, and you start to want more. You want to do better for people. And you make these intersections, whether it's through straight edge culture to not do drugs, or even, you want to be a better person, you're lifting weights or something. I think it kind of becomes religious, even if you're talking into a specific notion of like Christian punk rock. The point is that you become naturally ideological through your art, and it's just something that makes you authentic in how you present yourself, even though you're not putting it on the pedestal. It's just a natural part of yourself. It's like, you could, again, like the Christian punk rock narrative, you could be MXPX and you could sound like Blink-182, but do you know we're Christian and we go to church? It's just there, but it's funny. It's the natural state of things.
Would you call yourself a right-wing hipster?
I mean, it's plausible. I mean, it's like I'm saying, it all relates well, hipster or not hipster. It's just names are names. They're just labels, right? You could, I mean, I always joke and say some of my opponents are hipster racists because they would be into the hip culture, but just as Trojan horses to get out wignattery. And I find that as classically bad optics, because the real hipsters will call you out and it'll fuel their shit-lib desires and all that. And so you have to be very so I guess in semantic wise, it's not enough to say right-wing hipster, because that means I'm a hipster being ironic about right-wing. But that's the problem is, no, I'm sincere about un vaudois, French new rights, and I do like a lot of hip things, whether that is vinyl records to cassette tapes to old computers. But it's also something about the artist that is being ironic or eclectic. It's also something an artist or an intellectual naturally does. I mean, it's really, we're talking about aesthetic and how you approach it. So that's how I think about it.
Wow. So yeah, because I don't know, this concept of the right-wing hipster, I find kind of interesting and a little bit funny. I know that the word hipster is very triggering for people on the right wing, but you are very, very plugged in with all kinds of different pop culture that you express in your work, and I think someone would really have to kind of be plugged in with a lot of that stuff to kind of get you in many ways. And it's sort of like a, how do I express this? It's a higher level of culture in the sense that when you are really knowledgeable about a great many different cultural aspects, arts, music, literature, philosophy, and then you can reference that freely throughout your art and playfully, in a sense that there's something cool about that, So like for me, my Twitter, just for example, is I approach it almost like a meme museum, like a meme art show, where I try to find like only the very best memes and only the hottest takes, and I figure I really want to like make it worth people's time to stop and look at the stuff. And it's not sort of all art related or whatever, but anyway, I think this is kind of sort of a neat concept here. But is there anything specifically about your site or your work that you'd like to talk about, that really is central to who you are and the message you're trying to get across?
Well, I mean, starting in 2009, I was just an average millennial using the internet like everyone else. But I think the problem ultimately is we take this data that's in front of us, we kind of take for granted. We all think it's edible. You eat it up and then you throw it away, and then sooner or later some corporation is throwing it away. And the problem is we want our old GeoCities and old websites from the 90s still up, and yet corporations take it off and they can erase us just like that and revise history. And so the one thing I've, especially being very active in 2019 with podcasting on The Stark Truth with Robert Stark, I really wanted to convey my anger that I had of trying to be blue pilled and trying to be normal in this American society that won't let you be normal, that hates you for being white. And so, as a normal Asian studies major who was studying Japanese and Chinese and all that, you can't be the white guy in the room because they hate you. And so I just try to put out all the contradictions to that and what it means, and how the liberal normies of who are similar my age and my peer group, they get away with this stuff. And so it's kind of almost like a coming to age, or at least with the internet, it is a virtual Stammesdot, and you can give these legitimate criticisms to not only your peers, but to other anti-modernist, anti-nationalist types as well. And there's a dialogue going on in the internet. And so I realized that the internet, for most of us, is our tool of how we express art. And in a way, we kind of become a part of that subculture, that those are our only platforms. Like you're looking at TikTok or something like that. And so you're just left with your smartphone filming yourself. And in a minimal stance, without all the fancy cameras and expensive programs and the learning curves, how can, in a lo-fi DIY manner, kind of like what the old like indie rockers did in the 90s, how can you put yourself on tape and let people find your data throughout the internet by mistake, by a false Google search and all that? And what you're saying doesn't make sense. Is it coherence? All that I like to think about myself. And so the main thing is I have a bunch of obscure concepts, and it's hard to explain people on first impression. It's just I want people to read me. So when they read my books and my articles, they'll ask, what the hell is Asianarianism? What the hell is queer culture? What the hell is fast food fascism? All this stuff, which I would like to further elaborate on. And then what happens is you influence that dialogue, and then that moves what's happening in those spheres around. I mean, the term grifter really started to appear post Unite the Right, when the national circle started to fear that kind of capitalist undertaking, and that made people more into Keith Woods, and they became more anti-capitalist. And that's what I'm trying to say, is that we're really having a dialogue on these internet spaces, and I must get my art out there, and I must have as much data and mirror sites as possible, because one day, 10, 20 years from now, I will be doing an old Google search in 2040, 2045 and saying, oh, is my link tree still up? Oh, it's been banned.
Yeah. Wow. there's a lot to unpack there. Nullis, do you have any responses or questions?
Well, just more observations. I mean, this was an excellent introduction and more in tune of my impressions of what was said. A very valid critique, a right-wing critique, would be that, first of all, not just art, but the identity, the various forms of ideological expression are varied in the right wing. It's not just one monolithic group. And that's an important distinction that we have to make. What I do see as a critique of this, though, and each one of these represent various layers or elements of the European spirit or the European experience or tradition. The problem I see often is that we're wasting a lot of time arguing with each other, and it's really not a productive endeavor, in my opinion. I think that each one of these aspects, each one of these layers has its audience, it has its demographic, it has its group that identifies with that particular message. And I think that focusing on the arguments, debating is important. Don't get me wrong. So we have to debate. We have to find those threads that bring us closer together as a whole. But we shouldn't get bogged down on nuance or various forms of minutia that might be relevant maybe once we succeed down the road, maybe, but not now. Right now, the more important point is to focus on finding the building bridges and finding ways we can get closer together. That's one thing that I think is an important point that I think Pilleater kind of, you've also sort of addressed this, if I understood correctly. And I mean, obviously, I have an opinion. I have my position. I'm very open about my position on many things, so it's not a secret. But I try to avoid these arguments as much as possible. I'll get into a debate, but I'll try to avoid the unnecessary arguments, and especially if it gets personal, it makes no sense whatsoever. Mm-hmm. As far as the hipster thing is concerned, well, I'm somewhat of an older generation, so I'll call myself, just for lack of a better term, a proto hipster. What I mean by that, is I don't wear a fedora. No, what I mean by that is that nice. That I enjoy the settings. I like the things that a lot of hipsters like. What I don't like, or what I dislike, is how they ruin everything. And I don't mean this towards you or anyone who's on the right wing who's interested in these hipster tropes or let's just say trappings. I'm just saying that in general, there's this kind of idea that hipsters tend to ruin everything. You'll take like the lumbersexual thing. I mean, it's like, just go out and bushcraft. Don't wear, a clean shirt. Just go out and do it, and something like that. So don't make a fashion statement out of it. Just do it. Get a nice old axe and just go out, and so, or just have a good coffee, don't make a big, religion out of it, so that's the thing that kind of like, I get a little bit, I don't like about that the millennial generation, that they tend to, look at these things and they're like, oh, wow, this is so nostalgic. This is so old and everything. And I'm like, well, yeah, it is, but it's cool. I like it, but we don't have to go crazy over it either.
Yeah. Like getting into vinyl or something like that.
Yeah. And so finally, I just wanted to add that I think that it's important that we find a message with which, the average person, whatever generation or demographic that is, with whom we want to identify, can identify with our message. And I think that what you mentioned with fast food nationalism, or the famous, the well-known, Rich's 7-Eleven nationalism, is also something like that. People identify with it because they know it's a tangible. They know the 7-Eleven. They know what it used to be like back in the day. Yeah. They know what fast food places were like back in the day. They don't see the videos of Popeyes. Like these big brawls in Popeyes. I mean, it's just outrageous, right?
Yeah.
So you don't see. So you want to have something that people, the average person, they can identify with it. It ties into their socialization. It ties into their nostalgia. So I think you're hitting on exactly the most important points in the messaging, Pilleater.
Yes, for sure. I mean, I was at, it's funny about fast food fascism. I was just about to upload an updated article on that on my Substack and called Fast Food Fascism 2022, because that's like a 3-4 year old article now. Mm-hmm. It's just covered in my blog spot. And I just forgot that other people, like Brandon Abson and the other fuse. That's kind of really popular now. What we see, we used to live in a country, a proper country, and I think some of the normies or the shitlibs are coming onto it, saying, "Do you consider the crafts a form of nationalism? Is there something?" It's like there was a podcast I did back in 2017 by a guy named Snog, an Australian musician, and his whole aesthetics was like the golden arches of McDonald's as a form of swastika, kind of morphing the neo-folk imagery with the fast food. I was deeply influenced by that, but maybe I should write something on Snog or something.
Well, let's get right into the questions, focusing a little more on Imperium art. I highly recommend everybody go to Pilleater's websites and explore. There's a vast amount of and a vast variety of different content to check out. I like your music a lot. I think it's got this quirky, fun, cool, weird quality to it. I like that it's not this hyper. It's kind of like, in a sense, it's like punk in its attitude, although it's techno in its like medium in some ways. So I find it fun. I enjoy it. So anyway, let's get into the questions here. What is your take on the state of the arts in the white identitarian sphere?
Well, I like what's going on, and I'm very hopeful about this next decade in the 20s, is because, as I was saying before, you have people now like Antelope Hill Press and White Arts Collective. Those are good, platforms. And I like how there is this focus on it, on like, the identitarian aspect. Where do you want to say? You want to use that word? You want to say nationalist? I say it's all just anti-modernist, anti-liberal. You're going against something. And my only concern, or at least my concern has been, is that of course you don't want to fall under the bad optics canon that we've been seeing in the last decade. There was a lot of proliferation with the alt-right, which was the intersectional far right. That's basically it was, where all right-wing spheres got together to join an umbrella term to go against the state. And I liked that. But then it started to collapse after Post Unite to Right, and because the internet proliferates everyone and everybody's against each other, there's no unity anymore. And the thing is, people can have unity, and there can be certain as well interests. I always use the best example. There is a great documentary about Tooth and Nail Records, a Christian punk label. And you could just write that Tooth and Nail Records documentary. I forget what it was called, but it's a great documentary because it talks about a group of young Californian kids during the 90s. They all liked punk and ska and straight edge, but they all went to church. They were all Christian, and they didn't like any of the degenerate stuff happening. So they made normal stuff like shoegaze or hardcore. And then subtly they would say a message about God, very under the text. And then when other people would find out, they would get so furious. You're a Christian band. You're this horrible. And so Tooth and Nail Records kind of went against that, because it was kind of, I wouldn't say a Trojan horse, but these were just people who grew up in the church scene, believed Christianity was right, and went along with it. So I see some of those places like Antelope Hill Press or even White Arts Collective taking the tooth and nail strategy, saying, listen, we just make any other records or music you would probably hear on Sub Pop or whatever. But look, our underlying notion is that we're white identitarian, white nationalists, whatever you want to say, race realist. The point in being is that there's this is our interest. This is what unites us in a social clique. And whatever the music we have, it doesn't really matter. People downplay the aspect of, the audience, and so that's kind of my hope for this decade, is that, things become so, everybody in common sense knows that the state is having extreme COVID mandates, and more clown world assured and transhumanist singularity silliness will happen, but it'll almost be normal, especially in a Republican side, to be the common sense party of, white is right or something like that. And I think that we might see a change of the overtone window in that manner, where the artistic, to be resistant, is naturally going against something that would be uncalled for almost 40, 50 years ago, but it's just the environment makes it out to be that way, where you can now express your art in a fashion which you can, be anti-PC or PC in the same way.
Yeah, yeah. Nellis, do you want to jump in real quick, or?
No, you can just continue.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, great people is like Ariel Pink and John Mouse. They're on like the whole civic thing. It's like, John Mouse will wear the oven mitts to make jokes about the Holocaust, and Ariel Pink will be like, I voted Trump. And then they're going to be canceled. They're just flirting with the text. But it's just at a point where it's like, these people mean so much to everyone, so it's just normal.
Right. Yeah. I think of Emily Yukis as one of the most based artists out there. I know that she's focusing more on news media now, but if you look at some of the stuff that she's produced it's sort of right-wing punk rock in a way. It's like white nationalist punk mentality. Anyway, yeah, there's a lot to unfold there. I'm glad that you feel that it's positive in a, I don't know, it's a contradictory way, but as things get harder, we get stronger, and our culture grows. We become more sophisticated. We have to learn to survive through these changes. Just this recent purge with Twitter, Linktree, etc. We'll find other ways to get around this stuff. And, I always say we really need our own internet, but it's an interesting trajectory that we're on. I'm also really interested in trying to isolate, well, where are the faults? Where are the weaknesses? Why are we not all on the same page? Or should we be? Should we be kind of in symphony with a certain message, even though we have our different styles and mediums? What do you think about that?
Again, the underlying message is that everybody has their traditions, has their manners and etiquette, what they want. But I think the internet as a whole becoming, Silicon Valley corporate control, it's obnoxious because it's to a point where you basically can only sell a product on the internet and you won't get banned. And if you question selling products or saying anything politically motivated, you're off the internet. And that's sad because the early days of the internet, especially in kind of the BBS land and all that, you could say whatever you want in the most clandestine form ever. But now it seems like people don't have .coms anymore. It's just a Twitter or a Facebook or something. Right. And every subculture, if you're a woman and you like taking pictures of yourself, you go on Instagram. You have to have a white collar job and you're kind of reactionary, use a Facebook. Yeah. And if you just do using concrete poetry or memes, you have to use a Twitter, but they're all owned in San Francisco and they all hate us. And so it's sad when we play this game saying it's about meta politics. It's about culture. No, it's already won. It's Monopoly, the end stage of Monopoly. And so it's even harder. So we have to invest in technologies like dark web stuff or like older stuff or like other bizarre alt platforms and kind of the medium is the message type of ordeal. And so I think what happens is everyone now is a shit poster. Everyone now is kind of just surviving through the YouTube comments that your celebrity, your ego becomes popular because that guy is known for posting on YouTube comments, but doesn't publish an article or anything like that. And that's kind of becoming the new celebrity of just the person making indirect communications with one another rather than say a hub, a YouTube channel that makes a million. We now have to be more like people knowing each other in this very bizarre way. And I kind of like that at the same time, but it's also going to get a little more difficult because we're using the internet to our advantage in many different ways. And we're all just multi-platformist, but it's hard to consolidate because it's like we constantly redirect people to see that site or this site. And it's like never sincere. How can we really publish our stuff so it's immediately in a book? And it's never lost in time. And I think that's what we're up against.
I find this multi-platformism frustrating because I don't know how to, there's a certain type of person that just clings to Facebook, and there's a certain type of person that's into Instagram, et cetera. And I don't know. It just seems like it it's like divide and conquer almost, that like you can't reach all of them all at once in one place. But I suppose whatever that is, what it is.
Yeah, you're right. Because, what I learned on Facebook, I have an article on my Substack called, This is Dark Data, where one of my concerns was that, I was on Facebook during the silver years when the 4chaners took it over and made it like a shit posting site where you could be like anti-liberal and you're using Facebook, and all the normies went to like Snapchat or something. But what happened now is Facebook is for an older millennial generation, the 30-year-old boomer who has a nice white collar job in Brooklyn, but then tries to sound like us and say red pill this, red pill that. It's almost as if Facebook is now card for the older normie with a white collar job that wants to sound reactionary. And I think there's a problem with that because, one, it doesn't reach out to everyone else. Facebook is privatized. You need an account to get in, and none of their stuff, all that posting is like, it's all like fast food stuff. It won't be published in a book. It's not reaching out in a public forum. It's all just, and so who cares if you're Alex Gendler, because it won't matter because you're just a private account on Facebook. And I think that's kind of bad because that's literally what the elites want, social media for IRL people, but not in this rock star platform where we can change people, where we become, that guy that's influenced. And that's what we're trying, is the latter, not the former.
Yeah. I feel like it's a dead end in a sense that it's just what the Democrats and Republicans want. They want you to be corralled into this little sort of an echo chamber, and everybody kind of fights with each other, and they post memes all day, and nothing gets done. And like the IQ level of Facebook is, it's like, oh God, people are so out of touch because they think they're getting all the hot information, but
oh no, that it got worse. I call it left book and meta modern pyramid scheme. Those are the two dominant groups that run it, and they're horrible. And they constantly drag me back in. But I'm like, you guys are not on Twitter or YouTube. You're literally an echo chamber. Yeah. And I've dealt with these people for 2 years, and I have some kind of anger with them. And so I never looked back on Facebook. I just will go on Facebook and be like, F this platform. This is white collar, whatever. But I understand Facebook is dead. Don't use it.
I agree.
Donald,
go ahead.
Yeah. No, just a few comments. Well, first of all, just on the Facebook subject, what's interesting is that many countries in Europe prefer to use Facebook to Twitter. For example, the Hungarian scene on Facebook is a lot more active than it is on Twitter. You don't have a very strong Hungarian political presence on Twitter like you do, for example, in the United States. So they tend to post everything on Twitter over there for some reason. And I don't understand why they continue to do that, but I'm starting to see a slower migration away from Facebook, but for the time being, that's their go-to social media. But I just wanted to add you mentioned a few things came to mind. I had a conversation with Spencer Quinn on my show, Conversations with the Wind. And we were talking about the anti-communist movements throughout the old Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc. And what was very interesting was that you had a number of different dissidents, but they all represented different ideologies, different identities, different goals. They were all united in their anti-communist stance, but that's where it ended. There was no further cooperation between these groups. In fact, they even criticized each other quite a bit. So, and all of that, once officially at least, the Soviet Union and these systems fell apart. Although the Hungarians like to call this the gangster exchange as opposed to the system exchange, right? What really happened was that these groups then became polar opposites to each other. So you're going to see this in the COVID movement, these anti-vax movements. You'll have a lot of different groups represented there. There's a lot of liberals. There's a lot of libertarians. There's a lot of reactionaries, right-wingers. Everyone's in this anti-vax camp. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they agree with each other on everything. They're just united in this position. So we have to be very careful about that in terms of understanding who's representing what when they're communicating things. So you might agree with them on one stance. It doesn't mean you're going to agree with them on every stance. And we have to pick and choose those issues that we find most important, that are pertinent to our betterment, that are good, important for our well-being and our future. So I want to just bring that up. And I also think that you're right about the optimism that you have as far as the artistic scene is concerned. I think that a lot of the more serious, and not just the artistic, but the content creator scene, so to speak, I think that those who are consistent and serious in their message are still on. A lot of the people that are not as serious, they eventually fade away sooner or later. And so I see less arguments over nonsense and more important conversations being had today. I see the artists working a lot closer together than I did before. So I would say that these are all very on the right wing, and I think that all of these are very positive signs and trends.
Good stuff. I wanted to say in response to Pilleater that I look at Facebook kind of like a mind farm or a mind prison where everybody is kind of shackled to the narrative, I guess, that they want normies to suck on, so to speak. And I'll go in there on these raids and I'll J-pill like these groups of people, and I can't be defeated. I bullets bounce off me. I walk through fire. Nothing bothers me. I can easily go in there, but I try to sort of set up the situation. Find out where people are coming from. Bang, bang, bang. Hit them up with data, memes, links, this and that, and then you'll get those who flip out, and they make no sense. They just insult you because you just show, like you shattered their reality. And then you have the others that are like, yeah, I always thought, or I knew something was up with that, or, oh my God, this guy's got some balls. He can come out here and say the things you're not supposed to say, and then, week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, you start to see those people out, and then they're the ones like breaking people free. So that's just my angle. I'm maybe digressing a little bit here on these topics. But so back to the arts. What should people do, read, check out to become more informed on the arts of the white identitarian sphere?
I mean, for particularly white identitarian sphere, I mean, if you say identitarian, then I'm probably going to say like French New Right. I'm going to suggest going to Arctos and then picking out what is the right, or some like clandestine, like, esoteric right as a philosophy, the constant, academic agents channel, for the longest time, he was this kind of liberal until a month ago, he had Julius Evola Day, and he's saying, everybody read Julius Evola. And this is something I would never hear from him. And it's like, for the longest time, no one would ever read Julius Evola. But that's something where the YouTube scene, even to, 100K subscribers, are telling kids to read Julius Evola. And when you say identitarian, it's a loaded word because it means this postmodern concept of having identity in manners of, that's ideological or something like that. Now, when you say nationalist, that's also a little different too, because you'll then be studying what nationalism is. Okay. My book that I always was interested in undergraduate was Nicholas Gulich Clark's Black Sun, which was about Savitri Devi, Julius Evola, Miguel Serrano, all those like esoteric far-right figures. Very cool. He was this English Oxford guy, and he just played it to a liberal audience. And the final chapter was about Jared Taylor and what he's going to do. And it's like, well, there's a little some of those books, Clark's books, they're fantastic to get into, and just one historical interest will lead you into passion into what you want to get out. If academic agent is saying Julius Evola did nothing wrong, then you'll have more Evolians being sympathetic to a nationalist or identitarian sphere. I'm just a little worried about identitarian because it's really hard to find someone who reads Guillaume Fay or no, Archaeofuture. How many people have read Archaeofuturism? I just assume you'll read that book and then know what identitarianism is. But then you're a nationalist. You read the White Nationalist Manifesto by Greg Johnson, and then you're a nationalist. That's the thing. So it's many book clubs fighting, but everybody can be assured that the first thing is that you have an interest against liberalism. Tomislav Sunak's book Against Democracy and Equality. That old. It's been some time since I read that one, but some of those older texts are fantastic because they put it in such a way about there always has been a resistance against the neoliberal state or the liberal project, and that nationalism and race realism, these are just normal things. These are just like people just don't know that the right was an intellectual basis. And I think that's the whole point of like French New Right, is to try to say the right is just as legitimate as there ever was a left wing.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a thorough question, or rather a thorough answer. I'm sorry. Notice any responses?
No, I would add Solzhenitsyn into this list, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. I'm fascinated that you're interested in the esoteric side of the right wing. It's something I've been going into very deeply, but I'll say from my perspective, I feel there's a certain prejudice or a bias / narrow-mindedness of people on the right wing towards the esoteric. I think that there's a kind of a dominance of what I would even call scientism, a sort of, just stick to the facts, but like this esoteric, religious, mystical things, the mystery schools, all this, that it's unstable ground for the right wing in general. I mean, and specifically the far right, because whereas the right wing is very religious, right? But these topics, I don't know. I feel like that's something we need to dive into. We need to mine that very deeply and bring those powers into our game. But it's just not, I don't know. What do you think? Is there a bias against like the esoteric sphere?
I would say that the esoteric or the magical has always been apparent, like at the end of the 19th century. I mean, there you see this in circles about like New Age theory. It's an important factor in understanding things like the swastika that the Nazis would fly, because people say that's the symbol of evil and hatred and genocide, when really the swastika was almost taking it to a classic what a Jain would still put on, or a Hindu would still use the swastika of, birth, life, death, repeats into limbo. And some of that is an understanding of why you would have, National Socialists, not literal anti-capitalist race realists, but you have the magical aspect of the swastika being, well, we're doing this because we have to create an Aryan race, and all those keywords have to do with the esoterica, and why people like, Julius Evola or Carl Jung remained really popular before World War II. And again, you might think it's a freak show when you hear Miguel Serrano talking about UFO Nazi conspiracies, but then at the same time, you get a lot of young kids interested into it when there's internet memes talking about something that I used to know, and it's showing like the lore videos. The lore videos are nothing more than kids getting interested in Miguel Serrano and Nazi UFO conspiracy theory. But the point is, Jason Reza Giorgiani says it's so much better, but the concept is that if you break the natural world, you break the matrix you see in front of you, then everything else becomes plausible. That Bigfoot is real, that UFOs are there, or that, Alex Jones, even to the most, if you listen to what Alex Jones is saying about like nanobot technology and COVID, it's no longer, I'm an anti-vaxxer. I'm an anti-vaxxer because there's this AI singularity going against the people, and we must have a civic national revolution against it. And so I think people have always been interested in kind of magical aspects of things, is because it's not only just a creative writing exercise, but it's not that, but it's more about how magic would work, or how religion would work in a way. I mean, because if you're a Hindu or even a Christian or you believe in karma, there's some level of magic to it. And so your philosophy, or at least, religious persuasions, must have some kind of some purpose to it, some higher power. And I think religion often motivates people and the supernatural more than a scientific, where you could be the most rational, amazing atheist as possible. But then if you believe in karma and being something in the air, then obviously you might understand that the left might be decadent and degenerate, and that the right is trying to build a stronger, and this has been a human religious thing. So it all makes sense.
I would only add to this that I would separate the mystic from the magical. In my context, at least, for me, the mystic is a connection to the metaphysical. It's an organic expression of the metaphysical reality, if you will. The magic, the sorcery, is an inversion of that. This is my personal view on this. It's an inversion of that. The magic, the sorcerer creates an illusion of something that appears to be mystical, but it's not. And you see this in the expression of the way they turn around and make, for example, European mythological figures. They twist them on its head. They build it and change it in any way they want to. I personally believe in focusing on our uniquely European continuity. I'm not a big fan. I have a lot of respect for philosophers like Evolov for many things that he says, but I'm not into the Eastern mysticism aspect of it. For me, this has to be ground in our continuity as Europeans. For me, Christianity, Catholicism, Orthodoxy, these are all inherently European religions. They were birthed in Europe. They were created by Europeans, essentially. They were developed by Europeans. And I don't subscribe to any argument that says that otherwise. So for me, this is the element of it. So we have to be very careful when we're delving into the esoteric, that we don't lose ourselves in the esoteric. I'm not saying we shouldn't explore it, and I'm also not saying don't read Evelyn. Definitely read him, but what we have to do is we have to go in with a mind of understanding ourselves before we jump into the esoteric, and that's where I think it's important to know yourself and know where you come from, know where you belong as you're going into this world.
If I can piggytail or piggyback on top of that, sorry. I really love what Nullis is saying, and we've had this conversation a bit before, and I think it's a conversation that our sphere really needs to have more. For me, the ego is the fulcrum of the issue, where, if you quote magic is the use of natural forces and appealing to gods and spirits, etc., to get things you want. Whereas, a non-ego orientation is more of a spiritual orientation, and has a more connection to the divine and something more profound. So it's very hard to find the language to talk about this stuff, but I guess I'm feeling like the arts plays a role in this, that art in itself is a kind of, I know people are biased against the word magic, but in a sense, it's magical. Let's put it that way. And that, it can get around people.
It's mysterious.
Or mystical, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's something there. And it's just that I feel we in the right wing haven't gone really deep enough into it. Maybe we're too scared to talk about it. We don't have the language to talk about it. There's all, a whole world of disagreements to go into it. There's a whole world of reading and studying and contemplation that has to happen before you can even approach it. But anyway, I find these things interesting, and maybe that's the kind of topic that we maybe have to leave it for now, and then maybe get back to it, develop that as time goes by. But so let me ask you another question, Pilleater. How could the arts in our sphere help us reach our goals of stopping white genocide, taking back our countries, our sovereignty, uh, establishing the Imperium. How could the arts do that? In what way?
Well, I think of Imperium. I think of Francis Patriarchi's Imperium
Yes,
book and his
yes,
principles.
yes.
I mean, I briefly read it. I briefly read the first few chapters, and I like how he talks about life in there. But according to Imperium and according to stopping white genocide, is I think first and foremost is having identity. And here's the problem I've been seeing in some circles is that often you see somebody's identity is based upon a consumer choice between individualism, between liberalism, or something like that. And I see this a lot with the American character, where somebody who's often middle class and bourgeois, they don't see themselves as America. They see living in America. And the odd part is they see themselves as individuals. But, you know, if you have like a French dad or a French grandfather, you say, you know, I'm paying respects to my French side. All of a sudden, you are no longer this deracinated individual who's living in America. You side with the French. And this is something that's very secret among the middle class. And you kind of even goes to the aspect where you have the classical New Yorker who sees themselves as Italian, but they don't know a single word of Italian, and rather they're emulating what they saw in Sopranos, and they have a Brooklyn accent.
Right.
And call themselves Italian. Even the original Italians are like, that does not make any sense.
I know.
Is they take the term Italian because that is their identity politic. They see themselves as, you know, a Julius Evola spiritual race, and now they can think of themselves in this like Ralph Macchino type of Karate Kid type of way. But that's important because that's what white nationalists are trying to obtain. They're trying to say that the admixture European person should wake up and say, I'm a white man, 14 words, whatever. But my criticism is that it's going to be hard if the word white is often used by elites to mean deracinated. They certainly won't go against somebody who is German, French, or Italian. They are trying to go against the main ethnical European groups and call them white and get rid of their identity. But you will always have someone who's a Hungarian nationalist who says, I'm not those white Americans. I'm Hungarian. Some white nationalists will find that problematic because they should be in the white nationalist union. But the point is they have an identity. It's a concrete one with certain traditions where they can have a family. There is such thing as a Hungarian woman, a Hungarian man, a Hungarian culture. And I think that's really needed right now in America. Now, of course, you'll have these PSYOP programs like PragerU saying there's an American race, and that includes Somalis if we throw them in that.
Yeah, PragerU is garbage, man.
Yeah, that is bad.
It's a Mossad operation, to be honest.
Yeah. I think it's a PSYOP. I think you can't put a Somali in Nashville and call it American. But the point is they're playing on your feelings, that they understand you are deracinated. We're not allowing this. But if you say you're American, that could be a racial surrogate. Problem is it has to take it a further length. It can't be the Somali in Nashville. It has to be the white Americana, or at least some. Yeah. And so, like I was saying before, at American Renaissance with the whole, American Freedom Party, it's America as of good white character. And so they'll fly that colonial 13-star flag as a form of my race, my people. And that's something I haven't seen before. And I see that there's many ways you can go about it. I mean, the last 5 years, the identitarian fad was happening, where you have to challenge postmodern dialogue with identitarian dialogue. And because of that, now that things get canceled or whatever, you have to be more profound of your identity and just say enough is enough. I prefer to be in this neighborhood. It's just like Southern people, right? It's the concept is I'm from the South. I'm a Southern person.
Yeah.
And I'm white. And so again, I think to reaffirm to stop white genocide is identification, because once you have identification, then you say that you're, being a proponent of that identification. It's no longer becoming the target of the genocide of admixture European people. The admixture European people are finding these identities to be safe from the state, and then they can practice it in a family manner and go about it with their traditions and say, hey, I just prefer to be living in Nashville. I'm a Tenney person, and it's for my interest of that. And so that's how I think people have been kind of riding the tiger to say, I think to stop white genocide, you just say, this is my identity, this is who I am. But you got to be more open about it. It can't just be in secret, what the liberal bourgeois coward has been doing.
Right.
There's going to be a boiling point where you have to say, I prefer my Bostonian Ivy League Anglo-Saxon group of people over that, you know?
Yeah.
Donald, if I could just say, because this is an important point that was made. When I was growing up, it was almost implicit that being an American meant that you were white. It wasn't a question. There was no psyop. It was a very natural understanding.
Right.
And my experience, both of my parents arrived in the United States. I'm first generation here, so both of my parents are from Hungary, and so growing up, there was a distinction. You were expected to assimilate into this Americana and become an American. And when you became an American, maybe not yourself, maybe the next second, third, or fourth generation, then the expectation was that you assimilate fully into America and you become an American. And that meant by default that you were white. Okay, there was naturally a black element to this. There was the remnant slave population that remained that's in the United States. But other than that, we're talking about 90% of the United States at one point in time, right? That were white. And the understanding was that you assimilate and you become an American. And this has been corrupted. I would say it started probably in the early 19th century, but it wasn't as obvious in the early 19th century because you had a lot of European immigrants that fully assimilated. And so after 2 or 3 generations, that Italian American or German American became an American, or they married other people, what have you. Then you also have the various ethnic communities, but I don't want to go into that much detail. The point I'm trying to make is that this understanding of what it means to be an American has been completely decimated over the last 30, 40, 50 years. And so you find an American population, a white population, that is trying to figure out its own identity. Who are we? What are we, right? So they identify with white because that is the obvious unifying factor. Now, for a European, this is not a unifying factor because for them, they've been Hungarians, Austrians, Germans, French for centuries, and that's what they were always. So, but now that's changing because now you have all of these migration invasions happening in Europe. So now the Europeans are collectively confronting these invasions, even though you had the Ottoman invasions and various other moments in history. But back then, the collective identity was Christian versus Muslim. Today, this is a more secular society. So now the Europeans also have to come to terms with what is our collective identity and who are we collectively as Europeans. And but personally, I don't like to, I'm not against the term white, don't misunderstand me, but I personally prefer the term the brotherhood of the European man. I think that that's more accurate in my view, but it's a little bit mouthy, it's wordy and it's not as simple as white. I think from a communication point of view, white is a very clear and obvious message. And I've had arguments with Hungarians and other Europeans about this topic of, well, I'm not white, I'm Hungarian. Well, I'm like, well, okay, I understand what you're saying. And so let's define this a little further. So that's where we talk about this building the foundation of understanding of who we are. So you use nationalism as your foundation, as a Hungarian, as a Pole, as an Englishman or what have you. And that's your foundation. And then now you elevate that foundation to find what brings us all to, what are the common threads of us as Europeans? And then let's try to find that identity layer and build it in and incorporate it into our understanding of each other as a community. It's a difficult and very complicated topic, by the way, but it has to be addressed.
Well, and it'll be an ongoing topic for sure. I've often thought about using the term European American or just European of European descent. Whatever, we still have to work through some of the dialectic there. It would be nice if we had something a little better than just the term white, because that's just like a census checkbox, really. Doesn't say anything about who we are, our biospirit, etc. So let's move on a little bit. What advice would you give for creators making art for our sphere?
Well, you got to be like any other artist, and that includes of any political persuasion. I mean, going to art school, as much as you have to have the money or you don't have the money, point is you have maybe a skill or a trade or some form of expression, and your art must mean sense to what you're trying to accomplish. Most of us are probably political motivated and believe that there is a higher religious order. It just goes back to making Christian art. You could be Christian, but you could be also be making this art that has some esoteric message about Christianity. I mean, for a great example, I say like science fiction writers like Gene Wolfe, who's an open Catholic, but throughout his work, you can't see his Catholicism there, yet you read under the text and you find it. And so, in a way, it's understanding many multiple disciplines and interests, and as well as what the other art world is doing. It might be degenerate and depraved, of course, and I understand that a lot, and that's where art criticism comes in, but as well as reaffirming such skills and trades and styles and just saying it, calling it as your own, or calling it as this is what I want to contribute it as. It's not really about my political character, what I am. It's about how I express it. For example, it's like when I was on the Break the Rules podcast, often those guys will talk about art and cartooning, and they say, the whole bean mouth, that the cal art scene, that's obviously some neoliberal kind of propaganda of sorts, and I hear that a lot. But then again, it's like you have to appreciate the goofy bean mouth cal art stuff, because a lot of that could be used for whatever intention it may be. It may be just a reflection of the last 10 years, but there's just so much potential in it. Where could you imagine an Adventure Time that's actually using the internet lingo of far right sphere? It could plausibly happen. And so, point of being is that, aside from aesthetics having ideological biases, you have to know what the art world is doing at the moment and try and apply it into your own skill. Your character may be of nationalist or Navadois or anti-liberal persuasion. It doesn't really matter. The point of being is getting out there and expressing so much medium until you figure out how do you express yourself, how do you make grand art, and what is that you're trying to convey. And I think that's very important. Always remain enlightened and educated about what's going on in the art world, as silly as that sounds.
No, that's not silly at all. That was beautifully stated. So what are your thoughts on the Imperium art essay? Let's get into that now. We're going to kind of turn the page here and focus on the essay, which we do in every show. Were there any points in the essay that really stuck out or grabbed you?
Okay, well, I was looking at it last night, and importantly, it's like kind of being quizzing me on my T.S. Eliot and like The Wasteland, because I remember having an undergraduate where we had to spend like 2 classes on The Wasteland, and my only brick wall answer was, listen, he's tired of bourgeois man and modernity, and he wants to go back to somewhere, and hence I guess the modernist canon of sorts. But other than that, I would say, again, with Walter Benjamin, about how we're talking about mediums and being expressed like that there's intention, and that like the technology that often grows, you can relate to many different, like I was saying before. I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. It's like kind of like how as technology advances, the medium and what people remain the same. We may be all on the internet, and we may be we may be seeing memes of the Mona Lisa or something, but it's still our art. You're right. It's the whole fash wave thing. You might see like Roman bust of this and that, but now you're getting a crass web editor and you're making like jokes about, how you would like what kind of white girls they're like, or something really postmodern and eclectic and ironic. But in doing so, you're still talking about this, it wouldn't say modernity, but it's like after modernity, but after postmodernity, but in a way going back to a nationalist, what you would call Imperium canon. And those references you make in the article is more about the eccentric nature, that Eurocentric nature of modernity, but then being forced with postmodernity. But then you are the Imperium project is trying to accelerate back. Again, this has to do with like me thinking about what exactly what Francis Parker Yockey would say or something,
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I like the mission statement that it's more about going back to the authentic identity rather than something that is mass produced or something that is, you know, thinking about what do the modernists say about this, you know?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. It just occurred to me to like to bring this essay to somebody who's on the left, and I mean, I kind of know what they would say, but in a way, it would almost show them like what we're doing and what they're doing in its own regard. But maybe Nullis, you want to lead a little bit with this because you wrote the essay. Maybe you can bring up a point or two.
Well, one thing that came to mind, and this is fairly new because I'm looking into it now, when you mentioned Walter Benjamin, are the NFTs. And I'm trying to wrap my head around what the value of these NFTs is really, what it is right now, right? Because I'm trying to I understand the mechanism of it, and I also understand the process, and I understand what it is that, how you can mint an NFT and all that stuff. It's pretty straightforward. What I'm trying to figure out is what's the real value of that particular NFT? Because technically, in many cases, you're not really selling. I mean, I think in some exchanges you sell the copyright and commercialization of the work, but in many cases you don't. So when someone buys an NFT, what is it exactly that they're buying and trading? Because now when you mint an NFT, let's just say somebody buys it, then what happens is then it goes out into a market and then it's going to be bought and sold. But there's no intrinsic value to it because you as the artist can reproduce it yourself at will. And second, it's only saying it's a unique signature. It's almost like, I guess the best analogy would be getting a baseball card with a signature on it. That probably would be a value, at least for the time being, right? But what I'm seeing is that a lot of artists are going into this world of NFTs, into this world of the blockchain, and not really understanding what it is that they're doing with it. And nobody really understands where this is going. I mean, there's going to be regulation at some time. So maybe I don't know. Pilleater, are you familiar with this at all? And how do you think that would affect the value of it?
I'm actually, believe it or not, I'm critical of Bitcoin. And this might come from me not being Bitcoin rich or anything like that, but I strongly believe, as much as digital art, I like it. But the thing is, it goes back to what the economy values it and what other people value it. I remember there was a blank Banshee NFT being sold for $200. Somebody bought it all and then resold it for $50. It's just like trading cards. So no matter the medium, it's still going to be that esoteric book that has the pondering my orb meme on it because people decidingly so it has value versus the NFT. And so my criticism really is about Bitcoin and about the whole cryptocurrency world of holding the bag before anyone else. And I don't know. I'm very divided on that because if we were to really implement digital currency, it would provide this whole different outbreak of other things. And I think people are investing in how society will decline rather than the advancement of anything progressive. It's like a get rich quick scheme.
Yep.
It's tough to say. There's a lot of people out there that have all the answers and this and that. And on the one hand, are we playing into this whole transhumanist thing about, digital currency being controlled by the elites? And, should we be, what can we do to protect Bitcoin as a kind of an alternative currency that cannot be tracked by the government? Because essentially we are tax slaves. If every American stopped paying taxes for 1 year, we would shut down the government and the world in a way, so there's a lot there. And I guess time is really going to tell. As far as my take on NFTs, I think it's going to rise and fall. It'll be kind of, I'm not sure why it's almost exclusively on Ethereum. I think there's some other Bitcoin, but it seems to me almost like whoever created Ethereum came up with a marketing concept, But the real question here is, what's the value of the art? How do you,
Exactly.
That's the tricky part of this. I mean, and I mean, that question in general is a big question. How do you price art? People have asked me this for years, and of course, visual art versus music versus books, different pricing strategies, different ways to measure value. But we're looking at mostly, I think, visual art at this point with NFTs. And I'm going to say this, in a sense, there's 2 or 3 ways to look at it. One, as an artist and a professional artist, you have to set the price of your time and effort. They say that you only paint one painting in your life. You just do it across hundreds of canvases. So if you took all the years in schooling and investment that I put into becoming the artist I am today, then my paintings should be like $1 million each, something like that, But you have to kind of, take an average pricing for a certain type of a piece and then triple it and say, okay, that's what I'm going to take for this. And, the world may say, are you crazy? On the other hand, you've got art markets, the so-called art world. They've got their whole critic class, that they, and the museums, or not museums, the galleries, that they're in a kind of a money game. It's almost like Vegas in some sort of way. But fortunately, NFTs don't have that yet. Maybe at some point they will. Then there's the kind of the cultural value, like how much cultural value does Donald Kent have? What would his prices, what would his artwork go for within the white identitarian sphere, for example? Or even, okay, and then if you say, well, what about the MAGA sphere? What would his prices go for? So because they don't know him, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot at play here. That's a pretty interesting conversation, and we'll put that on the pile of conversations that we've had today that have no end.
It's like what's the value of Thomas Kincaid? Technically, he played the capitalist game right, but do we consider cottages in the field a symbol of white nationalism?
Mm-hmm. Right. It's an interesting topic. I think we'll have to revisit it, as we go. But overall, are there any closing thoughts then on the Imperium art essay?
I actually like the intentions. I like what's happening where Imperium as its own semantic and definition, falling to that tradition, knowing what Imperium is, aside from, say, modern or postmodern art, the concept that this is a strategy in order to get the values of what modernists were doing or pre-modernists were doing into the context of something Eurocentric and explicitly nationalist into technology and beyond. That's what I was getting from it, and the strategies you go about that. And I think these are all something that has well intentions to a project of sorts, and it could file for anyone getting out there as well, and how you can differentiate yourself from, say, religious art or that kind of art.
Nullis, any closing thoughts on that?
No, thank you very much for this great conversation. There's just so many different topics we've just touched upon, but I think that this conversation was just phenomenal, and I just wanted to thank you for your time with us.
Yeah, absolutely. This is why I have you on the show, and I feel like your depth of understanding, your depth of experience, your thoughtfulness, you're very well read on all these topics. You're a voice that needs to be heard much, much more in the arts of the right wing and the white identitarian world, white positive world we're in. So, I hope that we'll continue to communicate about these things and maybe collaborate in some way. I would recommend people in the White Art Collective to reach out to you, communicate with you, collaborate with you more. And we always invite critique. We're all kind of co-authoring this movement together, right? So there needs to be more dialogue between each other, and not just constantly reacting to the left or shit posting or something, but saying, what is this movement that we're crafting? We're all kind of individualized, we're atomized in the movement. And I feel as if we need to have more conversation, come together more, have a trajectory. And that's the concept of Imperium art. So, my vision is that there will be a white Imperium again. There will be a great kind of comeback for our people. I don't know when. I'm thinking sooner than better would be nice, but maybe in the next 100 years. And so this documentary hopefully is kind of planting the seed for these kinds of things. So once again, if you want to just tell us where we can find you.
Oh yeah, I mean, for now, if you just go to www.pilleater.com,
Mm-hmm.
that should provide all the links together. I will probably be, if Nellis can give me that new link to the new Linktree variant, I would love to make an entire link hub, or I might have to think of some hacks where maybe I can make another blog spot where it's just my links to said books and other ways, because the Linktree was very helpful, but for now, you could just go to pilleater.com, or even most importantly, youtube.com/Pilleater to watch all the videos and find through a rabbit hole the Twitter at twitter.com/realpilleater and all that. I mean, there's an intro video there, and events again, because we're getting more underground, you're just going to have to search the data through search engines and all that to once things are detached and everything. So I'm trying to bring my stuff together too, because the stuff we make is so abundant. I mean, maybe there'll be a day where I'll just have to make articles as PDF files and just host them somewhere.
Let's hope that things don't get too desperate. But like I said, I think as we get kicked off platforms, it forces us to be more creative. We'll see what happens. And thank you, Nellis, so much for your input. Of course, writing the essay. Abnormocracy.com is Nellis's site where you could download the essay and comment on it. You can get in touch with us. Conversations with the Winds is, I believe, every other Sunday. When's the next show, Nellis?
This coming Sunday at 8 p.m. on the White Art Collective's D-Live channel.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So we invite everybody to join us. We want to thank all the people in the chat and urge everybody to please share this, communicate, get in touch, hit the bell for for notifications, subscribe, the routines. I also want to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas as well, and hoping that your holidays are coming together.
And Merry Christmas too.
Merry Christmas. Thank you.
Yeah, and send our love to Korea, okay, Pilleater?
They say Merry Christmas here. There's no such thing as holidays.
Oh, okay. Whatever. Well, God bless. Have yourself a great night, and we'll talk to you guys.
Merry Christmas, guys.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.